Okay, this morning's Torah portion takes us to the end of the book of Exodus, the last two sections of the book of Exodus, but we're not going to do that today. I'm going to ask you to come with me again, because that's what we do. I'm going to ask you, remember the table of contents? We found it last week. Let's see if we can find it again. I'll tell you why in a second. Because the question today is, what do monies, cow, Amalekites have in common? Okay, that's the question. Now here's the answer. We talked about this a bit last year, but I want to reiterate it once again. Pesach, Passover, is the pilgrimage festival. There are three pilgrimage festivals in the Torah, Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuos, but the only one that Israelites really took seriously was Pesach, which means that all, especially in the Second Temple period, Jewish people from all over the world, from as far west as Spain and Gaul, France, and Britain, as far east as Afghanistan and India, during the Second Temple period, which is around the year zero, time of Jesus, around the year zero, people would leave home and begin a journey toward Jerusalem on Passover. Because the mitzvah of the Torah is you are to show up in Jerusalem. Vayera'eh is the word. You will be seen there. It's to become visible in the eyes of God and visible in the eyes of the community. And according to the Roman Jewish historian Josephus, typically Jerusalem had a population of maybe 10,000 people, but on Pesach it had a population of 100,000 people. People would come from all over the world in order to be in Jerusalem on Passover. Come on in, we got room. We'll find you room. You can bring a chair or you can just find a tush, right? And the city was alive with these visitors on this holiday. All of them came to make the Pesach. All of them came to celebrate the holiday. And all of them came to feel the sort of power of a world people, of a global people. You can imagine what this felt like. It's actually something we should duplicate because it's quite remarkable. Come in, make yourselves at home. Okay? Now, what I want to focus on, though, isn't what you did when you got to Jerusalem. What you did when you got to Jerusalem was you needed a place to stay, right? It was hard to get hotel reservations, even on hotels.com. So what you did was the hills of Jerusalem were covered with tents. You rented a tent. And then you went down into the city and you enjoyed the city. You know, you went to the Knesset, the Israel Museum, and you went down Ben Yehuda Street to buy tchotchkes for your kids. And then you needed Pesach stuff. Now, what did Pesach consist of? Pesach was a festive meal. The first thing you needed to do was to make arrangements to go up to the Temple Mount and offer your sacrifice. So you made those arrangements, you went to mikveh, and then you put on white gowns, and you walked up to the Temple Mount, and there was somebody who was prepared, believe it or not, to sell you a sheep, right? We had big sheep. It was a big business in selling sheep. And the priest would take your sheep, and the priest would ask, "Who are you?" And you would say, "I'm Douglas Workman from Encino." And the priest would say, "No, you're not from Encino, you're from New York." Right? I know, from Hempstead, New York. And he would go through your whole history. The priest knew your history. Priest knew everybody's history. And the priest would say, "Okay, what are you praying for this year?" And Doug would put his hands on the sheep and he'd say, "I got 2 daughters. I want them to get finished with college. I want them to get over all of this political activism. And I want them to get married and make me a grandfather." And the priest would say, "Ken Yehiratzon, should only be." And he would take your sheep and he would shecht your sheep, he would slaughter your sheep and he would clean it, which means he took out all the inedible parts and those got burned up on the altar. That's what God got. And the blood got poured out on the altar. That went to God. The edible parts of the sheep, he would roast, he would grill on the altar, wrap it in tin foil, and hand it to you in a bag. Right? You know, Zabar's kind of, you know, and now then you went back to your tent, because at your tent your family was waiting, because while you were making the sacrifice, your wife was going through the markets to get matzah, maror, charoset, right? And the matzah, flatbread, maror's a bitter condiment, charoset, a sweet condiment, right? And they're waiting for you. And Daddy's home. And you open this thing up and you put it on top of the plate. You all have a Seder plate? See, today you could say little teeny dishes of all this symbolic. You know what I'm talking about? See, that's how we do it. But in the old days, the Seder plate was dinner. Anyone ever eaten in a Moroccan restaurant? Or an Arabic restaurant or a Persian restaurant? You sit in the restaurant. Where do you sit, by the way? On the floor, on pillows. You lean. Because poor people who had nothing to eat, they knelt. Because there was nothing to eat. So you just knelt and ate as quickly as you could and get that. But if you're rich, you got to lean on a pillow. You lean on a pillow, and then what happens if you're in an Arabic or Persian or Moroccan restaurant? A woman with an extraordinarily lovely belly button comes into the room carrying a large hammered metal tray, and on the tray is what? If it's an Arabic restaurant, it's a big mound of rice. If it's a Moroccan restaurant, it's a big mound of couscous, right? If it's a Persian restaurant, it's even a bigger mound of rice, right? Because Persian people have rice with their rice, with a side of rice. Okay, it's good rice, but it's rice. And then on top of that is the meat that you get. So in this case, it's Pesach, so it's roast lamb. And the juices of the meat, they go all the way through the stuff, so it's nice and juicy. And then around it are the condiments, right? Which means the maror and charoset and greens. These weren't just symbolic foods. This was dinner. Now, if you're in a Moroccan restaurant, how do you eat this mess? No, hands, fat. What are you, a bunch of barbarians? You don't use hands. You use bread, of course. If it's a Moroccan restaurant, it's sort of a Frenchy baguette. If it's an Arabic restaurant, it's pita, right? If it's a Persian restaurant, it's a sort of flat lavash, right? You take the bread and you make a scooper out of the bread, right? And you take a scoop of the grain, the couscous or the rice, and a piece of the meat, and you dip it in the condiment, and you eat it. So Douglas, I know. Wait, I haven't even gotten, I haven't got rolling yet. So Douglas goes back to his tent on the hillsides of Jerusalem, and there's his wife, and she has it all ready, and he unwraps the lamb, and he places it on top of the tray. Pesach, that's dinner. You see, the Seder plate was dinner. And now you understand where the questions come from. Because if you can eat this with a pita, or with a lavash, or with a baguette. What happens if you try eating with a matzah? No, don't joke. That's the truth. Now, matzah didn't have to be hard. What we call matzah, which is this hard cracker-like thing, right? Their matzah was probably more like a tortilla, like a flat, soft bread. But the kid looks at it and says, wait, what's going on? On all other nights, we eat with lavash or we eat with pita. Tonight, you're eating with this flatbread. On all other nights, you tell me to eat my vegetables. Tonight, the only vegetable is this horrible, bitter vegetable. On all other nights. Now, the third question originally didn't have to do with leaning. The third question had to do with the meat. On all other nights, we eat all kinds of meat. Tonight, only roast lamb. Right? And the most important one is, on all other nights, you tell me not to play with my food. Tonight, you grown-ups are playing with the food. What's going on? And the father turns to the son and says, I have something I have to tell you. We are not who you think we are. I mean, think about this for a moment as a revelation. You think you're a middle-class American Jewish kid who grew up in the valley. I got news for you. We are ex-slaves. That's why we speak with this funny Egyptian accent. That's why. We are ex-slaves. I don't know if any of you have survivors in your family, but the children of survivors have a particular way of looking at the world. And in a certain way, that's the message being delivered at the Seder. Kid, you want to understand why your parents are so wacky? Because we were slaves in Egypt, and we bear those wounds. We bear those wounds on our bodies and on our souls. And that explains an awful lot. Explains who we are and how we are and what we are. This is what the Seder does. This is how the Seder was organized in ancient times. Now, one more piece of it so that you'll understand. When you finish the Seder, you finish telling the story, you had the meal. When you finished the meal, you said your prayers. And you gave thanks to God, and you had a prayer for tomorrow. And then what happens if you finish that? You have to have 4 cups of wine at the Seder, which means you're going to, and by the way, we're not talking little cups of Manischewitz. In case I don't say this enough, listen very carefully, because there's other rabbis in the room, and you'll believe them if you don't believe me. nowhere in the corpus of the law of the Jewish people are you commanded to drink sickeningly sweet Manischewitz wine. My father likes this crap. I don't know why. That's because you're a communist at heart, right? I mean, we drank Concord. Why did we drink Concord grape wine? Because we came from Europe to New York. We were starving peasants living on the Lower East Side of New York. The only grapes you can buy in New York are something called Concord grapes, which you should properly use to poison rats. Because Concord grapes raw are horrible. They're sour and bitter. But if you want to make wine out of Concord grapes, what you have to do is dump in enough sugar to kill the taste of the wine. And that's where you get Manischewitz from. There used to be a winery underneath the Lower East Side. It was in a basement called Shapiro's, Schapros. And the motto, which was written on the side of the building, was, "So sweet, you can cut it with a knife." And it showed a guy with a knife. That's how they made it. It's like extra sweet Malaga. Malaga's a French word meaning, "Ach!"
I used to go to the place to buy them.
Yeah. Ugh. Now, you're supposed to drink 4 cups of wine. After drinking 4 cups of wine, you're in a very good mood. But the problem is you run out of wine. So here are the Workman family having a lovely time drinking the wine, eating the sacrifice. And they finish the wine. So what do we do now? Well, the good news is the Rubensteins are right next door. And then you're in a tent. You can hear what they're doing. And the Rubensteins haven't finished their Seder, which means they still have more wine. So you go next door to the Rubensteins to drink their wine. And once the Rubensteins have finished their wine, right, then you're going to go to the Averbachs to finish their wine, right? And you're going to go from party to party, finishing everybody's wine. The Greek word for that is afikoman. So the rabbis, who had no sense of humor whatsoever and no sense of fun, said, "Ein maftirin achar haPesach afikoman." It isn't right to finish this beautiful sacred rite of Pesach by party hopping and drinking. Don't do it. Which tells you one very important thing. They all did it. That's the custom. Because you can imagine, you had 100,000 drunk Jews. It was Mardi Gras. It was Pesach Mardi Gras. That's how Pesach was celebrated in the ancient world. Now,
how did the lamb disappear from the traditional Jewish Pesach?
People ate lamb until the 10th century, the 11th century. Until the 11th century. In Maimonides' Code of Jewish Law, when he discusses the Pesach, he includes lamb, and he includes the third question. His version of the third question is the original one, which is, on all other nights we eat all this other meat. We eat chicken or turkey or tofu. Tonight you're eating roast lamb. Why? Because it was a custom. But what happened is that when the millennium turned, people go a little nuts when millenniums turn. That's still true. And there were these Christian movements and Muslim movements that the Messiah was coming. This was the end of time, right? And so that's where the Crusades came from. You had people thought it's the end of time. It's time to go take the Holy Land so we can be there when Messiah comes, when Jesus returns. So the Crusaders take off for the Holy Land. And Jews had the same thing. They had this idea that time was coming to an end. Messiah was coming. People like Maimonides were very worried about this, because if you believe that Messiah is coming, and then he doesn't come, the disappointment that sets in is quite remarkable. So they took lamb off the table in order to tamp down this messianic expectation. And they changed the rule 180 degrees. Instead of you gotta eat lamb, it became you mustn't eat lamb. Right? And now nobody eats lamb except for Rabbi Farkas on Pesach, right? Because he's a Maimonidean, that's why. He's a... He does. These guys. So now here's the part I wanted to get to. That's the custom. But now let's back this up a little bit. I live in Gaul. I live in France. I live in England, Britain. I live in Spain. I live in India, I live in Afghanistan, I live in Turkey in Asia Minor, a lot of Jews in Asia Minor, in Turkey. Pesach's coming. I'm going to make my pilgrimage. How long before Pesach do I have to leave to go? It's hard to get plane reservations because there's so many Jews going. You leave a month or two before, and you'd start your pilgrimage. And imagine this story. Now, so you live in Asia Minor, right? So you're going from village to village. You're going to stop in each Jewish community on the way. So after time, because this is happening for 1,000 years, Jewish communities would prepare to welcome visitors. Jewish communities would prepare to welcome pilgrims. And they would have, and you would have a place set out where everybody could sleep. You'd have meals. You'd have a community festival. And night after night for about a month, pilgrims would be coming through town. And the closer you got to Israel, because the more places people are coming from, the more people. So the towns that are closer to Israel, let's say in Lebanon, for example, if you're coming from the north, or in Jordan if you're coming from the east, right? Or on the port cities of Haifa and of Akko and Jaffa, there were great centers of pilgrimage. So that because the pilgrims are coming, and you would watch all these pilgrims. Now imagine being on the road to Jerusalem. The road to Jerusalem is a long, windy road up mountains, right? There were a set of songs that were prepared. We had our own pilgrimage songs. Shir HaMa'alot, the song of the ascent. These were songs that you learned to sing because everybody, thousands of people walking up the mountains together on their way to Jerusalem. Just keep this in mind. The image of it's quite remarkable. I told you last year that I had an experience of this, right? Really quickly. I have a teaching fellowship in Israel. And every summer we go to Israel to study and to teach at the Hartman Institute. And I promised my wife, if you'll let me do that, I'll take you anywhere in Europe you want to go on the way home. Right? So every year we've been stopping someplace in Europe. So one year we wanted to do the cities of northern Spain. Right, start in Barcelona and go to Girona and then Bilbao and across to north and then down into Portugal. So I'm booking the trip online, because we book our own trips online. And we figure I want to spend Shabbos. The farthest west you can go in Spain is a city called Santiago de Compostela, right? And I'm trying to get a hotel room. We're going to spend Shabbos there. It's a beautiful old medieval city with a famous cathedral. I can't get a hotel room. It took me, I'm online, I'm on 15 different websites trying to get a hotel room for that Saturday, for that Friday night and Saturday in Santiago de Compostela. I can't get a damn hotel room. Right? Finally, one of the sites comes up, ferociously overpriced. I took it. Because it was the only place I could get to stay. We couldn't figure this out. As we're starting our trip, we're in Girona and then Bilbao, right? Going across northern Spain. We see all these people walking. We see all these people. We see youth groups of people walking, youth groups, adult groups, people walking. So at one place we stopped. We were in one of the bigger cities that had a cathedral. I like cathedrals. I'm in the business, so So I'm sitting in this cathedral and there's this guy, this monk, sitting next to me, and I hear him speak English into his phone. So I said, "Can I ask you a question? What's going on?" And he says, "It's Dia del Dios." I was like, "Vos magst, Vos is Dia del Dios." He says, every year, so he told me this story, then I looked it up in my guidebook, he was right. Santiago de Compostela, which is the farthest west point in Europe, is reputed to be the burial place of Saint Yitzchak. Who is Saint Yitzchak? Jesus' brother, James. James is Yitzchak, Saint Yitzchak, Jesus' brother. What happened? The story was that after Jesus got crucified, James went a little crazy. He couldn't stand living anywhere near it. So he started walking away from Palestine, from Israel, bringing with him the teachings of Jesus. And he walked all the way, and the story is that he walked as far as he could walk and then stopped. And the farthest west you can go on the European subcontinent is Santiago de Compostela, and that's where he died, and his bones are buried underneath the cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. This became the third most popular pilgrim spot in all of Europe, right? Rome is number one, Jerusalem is number two, and Santiago de Compostela. Christians, Catholics, particularly from all over the Christian world, make pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela every year. I said, Mazel tov. He said, except this year. I said, yeah? He says, yeah, because every 11 years we celebrate his life and his mission. That's Dia del Dios. People from all over the world, hundreds of thousands, literally, of them, come to Santiago de Compostela to be in the cathedral on Dia del Dios. And he said to me, I said, when is Dia del Dios? He said, Saturday. I said, Shabbos? He says, yeah, you going? I said, yeah. He said, you're going to see something you'll never see in your life again. And true enough, as we got closer to the city, thousands of people. What happens is all the cities along the way set up hostels, places where you can sleep. They offer free meals. They offer entertainment, stories, all kinds of stuff. And as you get closer to those stories, you get to the city. It's like mobbed, full of people. It's crazy. Everyone going to the bishop's office. Because every time you stop along the way, they stamp your passport. You have a special pilgrimage passport. And they stamp it. You show the bishop your pilgrimage passport. You've come from Japan all the way to Santiago. You've come from London. You've come from Germany. You've come from Africa. You show the bishop your thing. If he certifies it, he gives you a certificate. That certificate gets you into the cathedral for the service. There's no other way to get into the cathedral for the service, except if you're a rabbi. That's the only other way to get into the cathedral for the service. And you go into the cathedral for the service, and there's this beautiful service. It's a remarkable service. And at the end, the priest declares that everyone who has a certificate is now pure. All of your sins are forgiven. It's like Yom Kippur on steroids, right? And then there's a huge festival that begins that night with the biggest fireworks festival in Europe. Unbelievable fireworks. And then a huge music and arts festival that begins for the next 3 days. Nina and I stumbled across this quite by accident. Now, here's the interesting part. So we took a tour of the city, and we're on the tour of the city with a couple of these two women. And they spoke a little English. One of them was a business professor in Madrid. And I said, what are you doing here? And she said, I'm not really that religious, she said. I'm not really religious at all. He said, but I did this with my father when I was a little kid, when I was 11. He said, and I just turned 51. It was 40 years ago. I did this with my father. And my youngest child just moved out of the house. She said, my youngest child just moved out of the house to take a job in Europe. And I realized that I'm an empty nester now and my life is changing. I wanted a symbol of the change of my life. So my girlfriend and I were doing the pilgrimage. And I said, well, what's it like? She says, it's extraordinary. She said, you start in Madrid. It's a 1 week walk to Compostela. And every day we walk, every night we stay in one of these towns. She said, we're not young, we don't stay in the hostel, we stay in a hotel, right? But you're walking, and along the way, you're talking to people. You're sharing stories with people. We've met people from all over the world. We're sharing stories of life and of faith. And taking a week out of your life to do nothing but walk, you can really think about things. And she says, I've really come to some resolution, that my life as a mother now has changed radically, and my life as a woman is going to be different now, and my husband and I, we have to change. I mean, it was a wonderful, this notion of inner change. The pilgrimage is an outer symbol of the inner change. And she said, I understand this custom of the sins being forgiven, not because your sins are erased, but because you come to a resolution of where I've come to in my life, and you're ready to move on. And now I understand Pesach so much better, because not everybody would do this every year, but you would do it whenever you felt the need to mark a change in your life. You would leave Tarzana or Encino, right? Fly to Madrid or London or someplace, and you would walk for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, to get to Jerusalem, and it would give you a chance to assimilate the fact that life is different now.
So is Judaism better or worse in your opinion? Because we don't have that option anymore.
Well, here's the question. That's a wonderful question, and I'm going to skillfully evade it, right? Because the rabbis...
Skillfully asking it.
I know you will. The rabbis, that's why I put you to the table of contents. The rabbis understood that in their times already, by the year 0, the world was too dangerous, physically dangerous, for large numbers of Jews to get on the road and start walking to Jerusalem. So if you can't do that, you can't get on the road and actually walk to Jerusalem because you get killed, right? A Jew walking through Poland is not going to make it, right? Or Turkey, right? So in those days. So what did they do? They gave us a virtual pilgrimage. A virtual pilgrimage, right? And that's what I want to direct your attention to in the table of contents, all right? So look at page XIII. It says Haftarot for holidays and special occasions. Everybody see that? XIII in the contents page. If you don't have a Chumash, I'll just read this to you. And I want you to look at the bottom of the page. You see everything leading up to Pesach? And it says Parshat Shkalim, Parshat Zachor. Everybody see this? You know what? Everybody see where I'm looking? Page XIII, right? It says Parshat Shkalim, Parshat Zachor, Parshat Para, Parshat Achodesh, Shabbos Hagadol, Pesach first day. The rabbis knew that by the 2nd century, it was too dangerous in the world for Jews to make actual pilgrimage. They didn't want you getting killed on the road. So they gave us instead a virtual pilgrimage. A virtual pilgrimage by way of a set of special Sabbaths with special scriptural readings leading up to Pesach. And what they wanted us to do was to make the journey not physically, but internally, but spiritually. And these are the way stations. These are the hostel places, the hotels along the way. So that as you start 6 weeks before Pesach with Parshat Shkalim, that's your first step. Then Parshat Zachor, then Parshas Para. Today is Parshat HaChodesh. It's called Parshat HaChodesh. The ostensible reason is because this week we're going to celebrate Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But you'll see there's a bigger reason why. And then the week before Pesach is Parshat HaGadol, Shabbos HaGadol, and then Pesach starts. So what you have in these special Shabbatot is the pilgrimage, the walking toward Jerusalem. Okay? Now here's the puzzle. I'm going to give you my ideas. I'm sure Rabbi Gelman has a few thoughts as well. I'd like you to figure this out. What is being said by each of these Shabbatot? What is being said at each of these special moments? So let's take a look at what each one means. And then what I'm going to ask you before we finish is, what's the journey? Someone is giving us dots in a journey, and I wonder what the journey represents. Okay? That's what I want to take a look at. Does that answer your question, maybe? Okay. So what we got here is, I brought my handy-dandy thing here. Okay, you ready? So Parshat Shkalim, turn to page 523. You guys want to come in and try to find a seat, or you love standing in the doorway? Because we can find seats. We got lots of seats. We got lots of people with welcome laps. These are laps Jews. They have good laps. This is the maftir. The maftir for Parshat Shkalim. Parshat Shkalim is usually celebrated 2 weeks before for Purim. Page 523. Okay? Exodus 30, verse 11. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when you take a census of the Israelite people according to their enrollment, each shall pay the Lord a ransom for himself on being enrolled, that no plague may come upon him through their being enrolled. This is what everyone who is enrolled in the record shall pay: a half shekel by the sanctuary weight, 20 gerah to the shekel, a half shekel offering to the Lord. Everyone who is entered in the records from the age of 20 and up shall give it. The rich shall not pay more, and the poor shall not pay less. 6 weeks before Pesach, what happened? There was a census taken. A census taken of the Israelite people. Now, the census was taken for 2 reasons. The temple needed to know the population of people, right? The Roman government wanted to know this also, by the way. That's Jesus' birth story. Remember why Jesus of Nazareth was in Bethlehem? Because his parents his father came from Bethlehem, but they were living in Nazareth. And he had to come to Bethlehem because that's when the census was. We talked about this at Christmas time. And I said to you, that's ridiculous. You would not have a census where people were moving about the country in December because the roads are all slushy and freezing and cold. The time to do this is springtime. Here it is, 6 weeks before Pesach. You have a census. When was Jesus born? 6 weeks before Pesach. That'll mess up the retail cycle if you had to have Christmas was in the springtime, but that's when it probably really happened. Okay, end of that part. You begin, and the other reason you're going to want to do this is why? Everybody pays half a shekel. Where's the money go? To the temple. Those are your shul dues. You pay shul dues. Jay Sanderson from the Federation's coming today, right? The notion that you pay the community a fee to maintain the community. You pay the synagogue a fee, you pay the community. It's an old idea. You owe the community something. But here it's a flat tax, half shekel for everybody, right? It's not graduated. Everyone is counted. So start with that idea that everyone is counted and everyone counts. And it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, powerful or weak, successful or failure, learned or foolish, it doesn't matter. Everyone pays the shekel because everyone counts. That's the first step in the pilgrimage. Now I'm going to ask you to tell me later what all this means. Second step is the week before the week before Purim. It's called Parsha Zachor, and the reading's on page 1135. Do a lot of page turning today, so I apologize for that. 1135. Ready? Everybody okay so far? 5 weeks before Passover, this is the reading. It's called Parshat Zachor, the Parsha of remembering. What are we going to remember? Somebody who hurt us badly. The name of this people is Amalek. Who was Amalek? Well, originally Amalek was the first people to attack us. We came out of Egypt. We were a ragged bunch of ex-slaves. We were in the desert, and this desert tribe came out of nowhere and attacked. And they did something which got us very upset. There are rules of warfare. When you attack a caravan, you attack from the front, because that's where A, the wealth is, and B, that's where the warriors are. The warriors precede the caravan, sort of the guards, and you attack from the front. That's the manly thing to do. What did Amalek do? They attacked from the back. Who's in the back of the caravan? Right? The back, the weak and the sick and the old are in the back. That's contrary to the rules of warfare. That shows a blatant disregard for the humanity of your enemy, a blatant ungentlemanliness in your warfare techniques. It shows that you have a heart of evil, because you don't understand, you don't have a sense that even though you're attacking an enemy, you respect that enemy. You respect the other, even if the other is your enemy. So Amalek becomes the perennial symbol of all that is evil in the world. And you have an obligation as a Jew in the world to remember that and destroy it. Here's the rule. It's on page 1135, the last verse, verse 17. Remember, Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. How undeterred by fear of God. Fear of God here means conscience. Yirat Elohim means conscience, okay? Undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary and cut down the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land the Lord God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Don't forget. Now, this partakes, we talked about this before, this partakes of the paradox of what Freud called repression. Don't forget to remember to destroy his memory. In other words, blot him out so no one remembers him. Don't forget. Don't forget who it is you're trying to forget. Because if you forget who it is you're trying to forget, you might actually remember. And that is not allowed. You can't. So remember not to forget who it is you need to forget so you don't forget. Is that clear? Now, so the most visible example of that is the most visible descendant of Amalek, the embodiment of Amalek, is Haman, is Haman. So every time his name is mentioned, what do? We blot out his name. See? See how that works? Don't forget. To not remember. To forget to remember. Forget it. So the second stage on our pilgrimage is, if the first stage is shkalim, you count. The second stage is attack evil. You have to remember that you're always in the world, and you have to be looking for evil and make sure that you blot it out. That's second step. Okay? I'm going to ask you what all this means in just a minute. Don't go away. Third is called para. Turn to page 880. 880. This one's the weirdest one. Para. Moo. Para means cow. Shabbos of the cow. That was last week. Okay? The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. It's page 880. This is the ritual the Lord has commanded. Instruct the people of Israel when you bring a red cow, para aduma, a red heifer, red cow, without blemish, really nice red cow, in which there's no defect, a perfect red cow, on which no yoke has been laid, a lazy, perfect red cow. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest, taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. The Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his fingers, sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tent of meeting. The cow will be burned in his sight, hide, flesh burned, dung included. The priest takes cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson stuff, throw it into the fire, consuming the cow. The priest shall wash his garments, bathe his body, not re-enter the camp until in the evening. He who performed the ritual shall wash his garments in water, bathe in the water. The man who is pure shall gather up ashes of the cow, deposit them outside the camp in a pure place, kept for water of lustration. This is water of lustration. Purifying water. Red cow water. What are you going to use red cow? You didn't know the Jews had this weird hocus pocusy stuff, did you? What are you going to use red cow water for, right? Right? He who gathers up the ashes shall be unclean. Okay. It's a permanent law. Here's the law. Ready? It's on page 882. He who touches the corpse of any human being shall be impure for 7 days. He shall purify himself with it on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and he shall not. If he fails to do it, he won't be pure. Whoever touches a corpse, the body of that person who's died, does not purify himself, defiles the Lord's tabernacle. What's red cow water used for? Purification. What makes you impure? Coming into contact with death. So what is red cow water all about? About cleansing you from the experience of coming into contact with death. Okay? Now, it's a hocusy-pocusy magical thing, but it has to do with something deeply psychological. Anyone who comes into contact with death changes. If you've ever had a loved one who died, if you're ever there when they died, if you've ever been part of mourning and grieving, it changes you. You are not the same. You are not the same for the days afterwards. You are not the same for the weeks afterwards. And frankly, for the rest of your life, you're not the same. Because you come to understand one of the principal, I'll be right there, one of the principal truths of being a human being is that none of us have an infinite number of tomorrows. And that's a truth that not a lot of people know. And it's a truth that the Torah wants you to understand. But you need then some sort of a ritual to mark that truth, but also to help you come back to the world of the living. In America, we have a different way. We bury a family in coffee cake, you know? You ever go to a shiva? You ever see as much coffee cake in your life, right? Jews meet catastrophe with carbohydrates, okay? But this is a very strange magical ritual dealing with life and death and what it means to live in a world knowing the truth of death. Wendy?
2 questions.
Yeah.
I thought that the biggest mitzvah of one of them was to bathe and prepare dead people.
Yeah, it is.
So why is that such a bad thing?
No, it's not. So here's the point.
But wait.
Yeah.
But also I know
But wait.
But I know there are no red calves.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So the people now who I don't
Okay, hang on.
know what they're called.
Okay.
How do you purify?
Okay. First of all, purity. The word here is tameh, and its opposite is tahor. You can translate that as pure and impure. Okay? Let's not. Because pure and impure connote filthiness, dirtiness. This means, let's just use the words in their original, right? A person who comes into contact with death is in a state of tameh. They're different than a person who's never come into contact with death, okay? They're psychologically different. Now, the Torah is dealing with a sort of magical thing, but I just want to talk about the psychology of it. They see the world through different eyes. They act differently, okay? In the Torah's law, the only thing you can't do if you're in that condition is you can't offer a sacrifice. You can't participate in the communal ritual, by the way, which includes Pesach. So if you're tameh, you can't make the Pesach. You have to make sure that, what, sorry? Yeah, so they instituted a thing called Pesach Sheni, which is you can do it a month later, okay? You know how you file an extension on your income taxes? You can do the same thing with Pesach. But think about this idea for just a second. Take that part out for a second, okay? You're different. You're different. So part of it, by the reason why you don't need the sacrifices, because you already understand the truth of life and death. Part of it is you walk around. I don't know how many of you have ever been in that circumstance, but it's really hard. You know, you lose a loved one, and everybody else goes about their lives as if it didn't happen, and you are feeling this rage inside and this hurt inside, and someone comes to you and says that they're deeply concerned that the person who won Dancing with the Stars is the wrong person, and you've just lost someone you loved dearly and your life was attached to them indelibly, and this person's worried about Dancing with the Stars? Or they give you this long story about how the clerk in the drugstore was impolite, and you want to punch them. You want to grab them by the throat. You can't because you're a nice person, but that's the point. Okay, you see the problem here? It's not about purity. It's about how do I live in the world knowing death? That's what it's about. So now I've had 3 steps along my pilgrimage, and I'm going to ask you to translate this soon. Shkalim, you count, you give the census. Zachor, you confront evil. Para, you deal with life and death. Okay? Douglas.
Question on Zachor.
Yeah.
We don't read it here. I mean,
Yeah, we read the Maftir. We don't read the Haftarah.
He wiped it out.
We read the Maftir, not the Haftarah.
Why?
It's a long story, but the answer is because the Haftarah is a really ugly story about genocide. And I'll get back to it another time right now. Turn to page 380. 380. That's today's Torah portion. So, Shkalim, Zachor, Para. Shkalim is you count in the census, right? Zachor, you would eliminate Amalek. Para, you deal with life and death. Here's today. This is HaChodesh, right? The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt. We're back in Egypt. This month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first of the months of the year. Speak to the whole community. Say to them on the 10th of the month, each of you take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. If the household too small for a lamb, let him share it in proportion number of persons. And it goes on. This is the beginning of the counting of our months. This is New Year's. The Jewish calendar, according to the Torah, was counted from the 1st of Nisan, not the 1st of Tishrei. The 1st of Tishrei was a Babylonian custom. We adopted it when we lived in Bavel, because we lived in Babylon and it was hard to date checks any other way, so we adopted their calendar, right? Just like we adopt January and February, March and April and May. But Nisan 1, which is this week, is New Year's Day for the Jewish people, because it's the beginning of the story of the Exodus. It's the beginning of the new era of free Jews. That's going to be the 4th stop on our pilgrimage. Ready? And then one more, and then I'm going to ask you what all this means, which is Shabbat Hagadol. There's no maftir for Shabbat Hagadol, but there's a Haftarah. Turn to page 1296. Everybody okay so far? You listening? We good? I'm going to ask you to interpret this. I'm going to ask you for your interpretation. $12.96 is from the last prophet in the Bible. His name is Malachi. He lived in a time when the Jewish community had returned after the destruction of the temple the first time, was rebuilding the city of Jerusalem and having a devil of a time of it. And there were people in the city of Jerusalem who wanted to give up, who said there's no way that we'll build this temple again because God has abandoned us. And because there's no way we're ever going to be great in the world. There's no significance to our peoplehood. And they were ready to give up. and comes along. There were 3 prophets, right? Malachi was the third of the 3 and the most powerful of the 3. And he offers this remarkable idea. He says, I am the Lord, I have not changed. You are the children of Jacob. You have not ceased to be. Yeah, I know you're having a tough time, but we still have this covenant. Remember, he says, turn back to me and I will turn back to you. And you ask, how shall we turn back? Ought man defraud God? Yet you're defrauding me. And you ask, how are we defrauding you? He says, you're suffering a curse. You're suffering this curse of despair. Look at the last lines of the Haftorah on page 1298. Ready? And this is the part that everyone quotes. It's a good song, by the way. Hine anochi sholech lachem et Eli hanavi. Lo, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the coming of the awesome, fearsome day of the Lord. He shall reconcile parents with children and children with parents, so that when I come, I do not strike the land with utter destruction. There was this idea that at the end of days, there would come a day of reconcile, a day of reckoning. This is not just Jehovah's Witnesses. Actually, we came up with it first. This day when history would come to an end, and all that was broken in history would be made whole again. And that day, you don't have a Messiah here in this thing, but you do have an announcer, someone who comes to announce it. And who's coming to announce it? Elijah. Elijah's coming to announce the end of history and the beginning of a new era. The beginning of a new era, which is an era of reconciliation and an era of wholeness and an era of peace. That's why you invite Elijah into your house at the end of the Seder. Because the Seder is divided into 2 parts. The first part of the Seder, everything up to the meal, tells the story of the Pesach that was, the Pesach of Egypt. The end of the Seder, everything from the meal to the end, which very few Jewish families get to. Right? I was 17 years old and before I discovered that the Seder did not end when all the men in the room loosened their belts and fell asleep. Right? Which was my father's custom and his father's custom and his father's father's custom going back to time immemorial. But it turns out that there's an end of the Seder. And what's the end of the Seder about? Pesach la'atid. The Passover that's yet to be. And what's that Passover? Not the liberation of the Jewish people, but the liberation of all the world. And not just the liberation from Pharaoh's slavery, the liberation from all forms of slavery, including death. What's the last line of the Seder? Before you get to Shana Ba B'Yerushalayim, which really is the last line of the Seder, Shana B'Yerushalayim doesn't mean next year we're going to go stay at the La Rome Hotel, the King David Hotel. It means next year in a redeemed Jerusalem. But the last line of the whole Seder is Chad Gad Ya, Chad Gad Ya. Zabina ba bitre zuze Chad Gad Ya, Zabina ba bitre zuze Chad Gad Ya. My dad bought me a goat, and this goat got eaten by a cat, that got bit by a dog, that got whacked by a stick, that got burned by the fire, that got quenched by the water, that got ate by the ox, that got taken down by the Burger King, who got slaughtered by the angel of death. And the last line of the Seder is Ve'ata Kodesh Baruch Hu V'shachat l'malcham aves. Comes God and destroys death. Chad Gad Ya, Chad Gad Ya. This idea of a hope for a future. And Elijah, is the precursor of that moment. So you invite Elijah into your house, you are inviting that messianic dream into your life. You are saying, I stake my life on it. This world that I live in, the way it is today, is not the way the world ought to be or will be. The world still contains the possibilities of its own redemption, and if I can open my door and my heart to that possibility, then redemption will come to the world. All right, ready? We got Shkalim, the story of the giving of the half shekel, the census. Zachor, the red cow. No, Zachor is the Amalek, is destroying Amalek, the evil. Para, the red cow, life and death. HaChodesh, the beginning of time. And Gadol, the end of time. What is the pilgrimage? Now, if I were, I could leave you alone until you think about this, right? What's the pilgrimage? Arnie, what's the pilgrimage?
Going through life.
Going through life. So tell me how you go through life. What are the stages of going through life? The first stage of going through life is shkalim, which says, I am. Shkalim, I put a half shekel, which means I am, I exist. I affirm my existence. And everyone begins equal. Everyone begins the same. And everyone shares a sense of significance. I count. That's what every bar mitzvah is. You say to a kid, kid, you count. You matter. You come into the room, you count. Okay? Zachor, what's Zachor? Amalek, what's that? Which means what? Now, what's your journey of life? Go ahead, tell me that.
Coming to age.
My responsibility in the world? I have to, every teenager fights evil. I mean, this is what being an adolescent is all about. I will find the evil in the world and I will confront it. Yes, please.
But he says to
I'm coming to
forget
that.
it, so I think it means don't be depressed because something bad happens.
Ah.
Forget about it and be happy and live your life.
Erase
because-
it.
Right.
Erase
That's
it.
what you kept saying.
The other way to think about it, see, erase it, live with it. The other way to think about it is, this isn't just an external journey, this is the internal journey. So first I have to erase my constant sense, that constant nagging sense of my insignificance. Right? That sense of I just don't matter. You do matter. I don't count. You do count. I'm not important. You are important. That's shkalim. The second one, if you did this internally, is Zachor, which says,
Don't fall prey to your own basis.
yeah, we all have Amalek in us. You all have an Amalek in you. So I have to figure out who is that inside of me. What is that destructive voice inside of me, that destructive urge, or that self-destructive urge inside of me? The part of me which wants to eradicate, right, the rest of me. That's the second one. Okay? So that's shkalim and zachor. Myra.
When you have encountered losses of loved ones in your life, you sit down to continue life,
Okay.
to forget the evils in the world, to do good,
Okay.
to start your life that you want to count your blessings.
All right, so we've had
instead of
three
the curses.
interpretations now. I just want you to listen to these three interpretations just now, right? So one interpretation is this interpretation of, this is my development. This is the story of human development. And a second interpretation is Michael's interpretation. This is the internal journey. And Myra's interpretation is, this is the journey of the person recovering from loss. When you've lost someone you dearly love, your first response is, I'm nobody, and I'm nothing, and I count for nothing, right? The second, so Shkalim comes and says, no, you do count. And the second one is you say, it's all evil. Everything is evil. There's no good, there's no sunrise in the world. And you come back and say, no, I can live with that. There is evil, yes, but it doesn't exhaust my reality. It doesn't characterize the totality of my reality. And then comes Para, and Para says, what? I can be pure again. I can recover from this. I can recover. Life can overcome death in the course of a human existence. Right? Or if you want to go back to Arnie's idea, part of growing up is confronting death and realizing that it's very real. Because that gives your life a sort of sense of poignancy. It keeps you from wasting time and wasting opportunities and wasting relationships. Because it's only people who think they have an infinite number of tomorrows that hold grudges. And you and I know, and all of us have been there, I've been with you, at gravesites with families where there were fights that never got resolved. And I love you was never said in time. Or I'm sorry was never said in time. Or I need you was never said in time. Or thank you was never said. And the unresolved part belongs to people who don't understand that it's a pretty fragile business being a human being. Okay? That's another way of understanding this, the internal journey. So Shkalim Zachor Para.
With this journey where you say I count,
Right.
do you need validation?
I don't know. What do you think?
I think you do.
How much do you need?
Person-
No, but that's the question.
Person to person.
That's an interesting question.
And if you do need validation from
Yeah. It's interesting, by the way, that in the Pesach, in the rule of the Torah, and I can't find it at this minute, the verb that's used is vayera'eh. You'll come to Jerusalem you would think it would say to see the temple, to see the presence of God. It's not what it says. To be seen. To be seen. You're coming there to be recognized, to be seen. That's a sort of validation, right? The feeling that when you come home, they know who you are. The idea that people recognize you in the world and you belong in the world. It's that, the strange feeling of being a place where nobody knows you is the opposite, right? You're in a city, a place, a town, a place where nobody knows who you are, and that sense of utter anonymity. It's a strange feeling. You like being in a place where people say, "Oh, Mr. Menon, welcome, good to see you again." Right? Right? I called for a refrigerator repair. My refrigerator is making a funny noise. It's Pesach, it's time, right? Yes. And for some reason they have a computer which has a sense of soul, because the guy said, "Hello, Mr. Feinstein, what can I do to help you?" I said, "Oh, thank God, it's Mr. LG, I said, "Fix my damn refrigerator." He says, "Well, it's Pesach, it's time, we'll get it fixed." He fixed it, by the way. I don't know how he did it. All right, so I got shkalim. We're not going to finish this. We're just make some suggestions because I want you to tell me what the journey is. Shkalim, I count. Zachor, I confront evil inside and outside, and I recognize that it doesn't exhaust my universe. Para, which means I can be whole again. I can know death and yet come back to the living. Hachodesh, time. Hachodesh, what does that one mean?
Another beginning.
It's another beginning. The word chodesh is a great word. It means month, but it really means renewal, beginning. Chadash, right. Chodesh means chadash. I can be renewed. I can start again. I'm not stuck. I'm not stuck. Yesterday does not define my totality. I am not defined. Now, what does it mean to be a slave? Being a slave means that every tomorrow is exactly like every yesterday. In order to be free, what do I say? Yesterday was yesterday, tomorrow's a different day. Right? The great Rabbi Annie once said, right? The sun will come up. There's something very powerful about this idea that I am not contained by the slavery of my yesterday. I have the capacity to turn in a different direction, to begin again. To begin again. That's a remarkable human ability. Okay? And the last one, Elijah. Shabbat HaGadol, the story of Elijah. What's that one? Hope. Which means, these are all things. Now, another way to think about this, these are all things that mark my liberation from slavery. A slave is insignificant, is a nothing. So Shkalim says, I count. Right? A slave is encompassed by evil. So Zachor says, no, you can confront evil. A slave is living on the edge of death. Para says, you choose life. A slave says, my yesterday defines me, there is no tomorrow. And a chodesh says, I have a tomorrow. And a slave says, there's no hope. And Shabbat HaGadol, the big Shabbos, says, there's always hope. There's always hope because there is a possibility built into the world that you don't recognize yet, but you will yet recognize it. It's still there. Okay? Let's take Myra's beautiful idea. The person who is grieving, we tell them, you count. This evil doesn't encompass you. You can cleanse yourself from death. You can begin again. And you can look at tomorrow. How do you know a person has settled their grief and is beginning to heal? When they can make plans for tomorrow. Go to a shiva and you say to your friend, I'll take you to lunch. They can't talk to you. A person in grief can't talk about tomorrow. But the moment that someone says, I'm looking forward to tomorrow, is the moment they're beginning to see light and not just darkness, right? You see the pilgrimage here? What the rabbis gave us in these Shabbatot are the steps from slavery to freedom, the steps of human development, and the steps of release from tragedy. Mark, go ahead.
I think your interpretation of the book was creative. It was insightful.
There's a butt coming. I'm feeling it. I just know.
However,
There it is. There it is. It's not even a butt. It's a
the
how.
issue is,
Yeah.
can you create and sustain faith without a sense of sacred space? I argue, and I say this is the purpose of the pilgrimage, not just for Jews, but for Hindus who go to the Ganges River, for Muslims who go to Mecca, for the